Welcome back to How to Raise Your Standards, Set Boundaries, and Stop People Pleasing, Part 2. So in Part 1, we talked about why we people please. And we talked about some of the ways that you can cultivate more empowerment in yourself so that you can stop the desire to do that behavior. And now in this video, we're gonna focus even deeper on how exactly to set boundaries. So once you've done the work in part 1 of getting really clear, connected to yourself, taking responsibility for your life, and deciding to raise the standards and figuring out what those standards are, now it's time to go out into the world and have these conversations and create these written agreements and do the things tangibly that are going to support those standards that you just set. So one thing I've learned about boundaries is that if we wait for the moment that they're required in order to set them, we'll often not do it right. I believe that boundaries are something that you want to set on your own, like in private, when you're calm and collected and not on the spot in the moment when somebody's asking you for something. So what that looks like is good fences make good neighbors, is creating the set of boundaries that you're going to live by. And that starts with, of course, like in the last video, doing the work of figuring out what your standards are, but then creating the boundaries. So let me share a few ways that that might look. If you're finding that you are people pleasing and you're saying yes to people, but when you really mean no, and the cost or the consequence of that is that you don't have enough time, then you need to raise your standards about what you spend your time on and who you spend your time with, and create boundaries around time. So obviously creating boundaries around time, to me, it screams of calendar. Let's get your boundaries into existence in a calendar, into a structure. Now, I'm a highly structured person internally. Like I like ideas to be structured. I like my calendar to be structured. I'm a little bit messy in my home. I don't necessarily need the most structure in my spaces, but what I found is having structures around time and around boundaries can be really helpful. So in the calendar world, a structure could be to create your week in a way that serves you. So for example, if you have a standard now that you want to take care of yourself, you might want to put a structure into your calendar that sets aside time every single morning for you to do your morning practice. If you're having issues with, let's say you're like me in business and you have a lot of clients and they all want a piece of your time and they're, constantly texting you and calling you, can I meet with you? Can you meet with me? And you're feeling overwhelmed and you're saying yes when you really mean no, you're trying to people please, then clearly you need new standards around your client relationships, your client agreements, which means you need to create boundaries, which means a structure. So a structure might look like going back to all your clients and creating a new agreement around here's how I'm going to work from now on, and gaining agreement from the client, and even creating a new contract with the client. This is something that every single year I go back into my own experience. I discover what are the areas that I'm feeling not so great about, that don't feel so good. I create the new standard for that, and then I create the new agreement with my clients. I announce to my clients, hey, going forward, this is how it's going to be. I'm going to be taking this day a week off, or I'm going to be doing coaching calls on these days instead, or I'll be starting an hour later than usual, or an hour earlier and finishing an hour earlier, or whatever it is. But what I'm trying to share is that you first identify the area of discomfort, like the area where the people pleasing is coming in. You identify the standard that wants to be raised, the boundary that wants to be put in place, and then the conversations and structures that need to be adopted in order to hold those standards and boundaries. So with clients, it can be client agreements, contracts, it can be your calendar, if it's around time, if it's around health, it can be around the food that you're eating, how you're getting your food, where you're shopping. That could be a new agreement that you make just with yourself. Now, before I dive even deeper into this topic, I do want to invite you to subscribe to my channel, consider liking this video, and also commenting below. So like I said earlier, and I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit, if you wait until the moment where you need the boundary to try to set it, it usually doesn't go so well. You have the most leverage in creating boundaries at the beginning of an agreement, at the beginning of a relationship. That's why when I bring a new client into my business, and maybe when you bring a new client into your business, that's the absolute best time to establish those boundaries with that client. I've found that when I start a relationship with that conversation, it goes so much easier and so much smoother. And in fact, the clients that I've always had the hardest times with are the ones that I've had the longest because they started with me before I had those boundaries and standards in place. Another thing to take on is to remember that you are in charge of not getting screwed. Mostly. The idea that, it can be sometimes very tempting to just blame others for being bad and for taking advantage of us. But chances are, if someone's taking advantage of you, it's because you gave them permission to do it. It's because you created the pattern. You didn't set the boundary and standard. And so it's on you to go back and to reorganize that agreement. And I don't know that I've given credit just yet in this particular video to the person that's had the biggest impact in my life with setting standards, and that is the person that I mention all the time, Nanilea Diamond, Dr. Nanilea Diamond. You can find her on Facebook. She has an awesome Facebook group that I'll link to below. But she talks a lot about standards and boundaries, and she also talks about upper limits, which we're not going to get into in this video. So in business, as you're developing agreements, you're developing new relationships with clients, that's the best time to establish the standards and boundaries. You might want to address things like, what are the requirements in order to be available to a client? For example, with me, when clients book a call with me, one of the requirements is that they have to fill out a check-in form so I understand where they are and what they want to work on. And so I can do a little homework and meet them and be able to hit the ground running quicker and also save time on our meeting instead of having to catch up on everything that's going on. So that's a requirement. Another thing you might want to share is what's acceptable behavior, what's not acceptable behavior. Like, for example, it's not acceptable for people to cancel their appointments with me last minute. We have a 24-hour notice agreement. I ask for people to give me 24 hours notice so that I can fill the calendar with something else, or at least know that I'm gonna have that time available again. Another thing you're gonna have to do as you set boundaries is to maintain those boundaries. This is where it can get really tricky, is actually addressing when a boundary is crossed or when an agreement is broken. This is where things start to corrode in relationships because we let somebody do it one time and then it happens again, and then before you know it, we're in this downward spiral where we're not respecting each other's boundaries and standards. And so one of the key things to really practice and master in your life is the art of having the uncomfortable conversation to bring the person back up to the standard, to share, hey, remember, we have an agreement that you're not going to cancel last minute. What happened, right? And coming at it from love. It doesn't mean that you have to break rapport. It doesn't mean you have to judge or be angry, but you can ask, what happened? Can you share with me what's going on? And perhaps even help that person to meet you at your standard next time. I want you to remember something. Somebody who is worthy of working with you, somebody that deserves your time and attention, is someone who will respect your boundaries. And maybe this sounds obvious, but I think some of you need to hear that someone who's committed and who respects you will do everything in their power to meet your boundaries, to hold your standards. There's a big difference between somebody who asks you, hey, would it be possible to move our meeting at the last minute? I know it's hard, versus someone who tells you, hey, I need to move our meeting at the last minute, right? There's a big difference in the energetic there. And so just noticing how people are showing up with respect to your boundaries. Are they showing up with a respectful consideration of them, or are they bulldozing all over them? And noticing the energy again and again and what patterns are showing up. And that might also ultimately be the ultimate boundary where you say, hey, this relationship isn't working for me anymore, and I'm no longer available for this agreement between us. Thank you. It might just be a goodbye altogether or a see you later. And finally, you need to enforce those boundaries and have those difficult conversations. And if and when it is time to say goodbye, or when something has not worked out, or it's, you've had a problem or a challenge come up with somebody, the last step of this whole thing is also to be able to let it go. to let it go when it needs to go, to accept somebody's apology if they've violated a boundary, but they're really contrite and they have promised that they understand it for the future and won't do it again. Like letting it go and not holding it in their face or waving it in their face in the future. It's also having that equanimity of being able to hold those standards very, very strongly, and also at the same time know when it's time to just have compassion and let go. I hope you enjoyed this video series on how to raise your standards, set boundaries, and stop people pleasing. I look forward to maybe meeting you soon if you're interested in working with me to build and grow your business in a joyful, aligned, energy-rich way. You can find out more about my products and services at superstaractivator.com/go.